This is From the Courtroom to the Boardroom, the podcast for the next generation of legal leaders with me, Simon Gibson. I was a lawyer for 13 years until I walked away from legal practice and entered the world of business. I'm now CEO of the Spirant Group and I lead a portfolio of businesses in the UK and Australia. On this upbeat podcast, I tackle the big issues facing law firms and businesses alike with the help of intriguing guests. Are you ready to rewrite the script? Then it's great to have you along for the ride. Hello, friends. Welcome to the podcast. Really grateful to you for your company. We're talking about data today. Now, for lawyers and law firms, data has always been something that's been relevant to confidentiality. But in recent years, with the introduction of GDPR and with the establishment of the Information Commissioner's Office, things have become rather risky. We've read and seen law firms being fined six-figure sums due to breaches of the relevant legislation. We've seen reputational damage and all manner of other consequences. And it seems to me that this is only going to get more important as we move towards advancing tech like artificial intelligence. So we really do need to make sure we've got our house in order in terms of protecting our clients' data and only using it as per the legislation. So I want to work out where exactly our responsibilities lie, what the do's and don'ts are, and also what the future holds as we enter towards emerging technology like the metaverse. How are things going to change, and how do we avoid those big fines and big risks? We need some expert help to go through these issues, and I'm really delighted to welcome Eugénie to the podcast today. Eugénie is an internationally renowned lawyer who specializes in data security and in cyber protection. And we're really thrilled that Eugénie has taken the time to join us today. She works and has worked with law firms all over the world. She's worked in-house with big tech companies, and she's also an experienced speaker on these really important areas. So I'm thrilled to say hello, Eugénie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure is all ours.
Thank you.
Now, before we get stuck into some of these quite complicated and very important areas, just tell us a little bit about your journey to date. How have you come to be a lawyer who helps businesses with their data protection and their cybersecurity?
I think it all started when I was a little girl in Australia. So I grew up in Australia from a little beach town called Newcastle, and I always wanted to be a lawyer. So, when I was 3 years old, I was running around the house telling my family that I was going to be an international barrister and that was going to be me, and that I was going to move overseas and conquer the world, as you all do and say when you're young, that world's your oyster. And I really just felt the need to protect. That was really the essence of me becoming a lawyer, really protecting, serving justice, because you could see areas where there were, discrepancies. So I just really wanted to protect. I didn't know at that age, obviously, what area of law that I was going to go in, though I knew that law was it. So I then went and I started out doing a double degree, law and international relations, and then so from Newcastle I moved to Sydney, and then from Sydney I'm doing a high level now. I moved from Sydney to London in 2020. I became a lawyer in 2020, and as I told you before, I had my ceremony in my one-bedroom apartment in London.
Because that must have been, you must have moved then to the UK and transition your legal career and your business at a time when the world was in disarray because of that virus we're all not mentioning anymore. So that must have been a bit challenging for you.
It was definitely challenging, navigating the fact that I had this dream and I just wanted to just do the dream and pursue what I wanted to do and be a lawyer. But then I knew that the virus was going to impact everyone. So I thought, and my mum was really my major proponent in telling me to just do it, just move. So I just did it, and it was very difficult. Obviously, coming to London in the middle of the pandemic, having no family. You just really had to bet. I had to bet on myself, really.
Yeah, I bet you did. And it must be particularly interesting in terms of you've worked with clients in the UK on their data protection, on their cyber security. You've helped them with privacy, which is why I was so keen to get your expertise today. So when we talk about data, what is it that we actually mean?
It's a bit of a buzzword at the moment, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
Data. Essentially, it's just the information that you store, right? That you access, any type of information that you can gather about anything. It doesn't even have to be about a person. It can be about anything, really. So it's not just about, we're going to talk about just digital data, of course, but there's other types of data that you can obviously gather. But for the purpose of this conversation, it's really just about gathering specific data about people, about, let's say, data about confidential information, which could be, let's say, intellectual property. But then we're kind of, it overlaps. It overlaps, really.
Yeah, because lawyers are familiar, aren't they, with the principle that you have to keep things confidential. I mean, that
underpins our profession.
It does.
Yes.
But I think where the changes have been from my perspective in recent years is we've gone from a situation where confidentiality felt quite straightforward. You know, what it meant was that you had to make sure that your filing cabinets were locked, making sure that you had to change your password on your computer reasonably frequently, to a situation where criminal activity can actually be put at the door of the law firm in terms of saying, well, we know it isn't you who've done anything wrong particularly. You haven't deliberately or recklessly, for example, left your file on the train. But in allowing these criminals access to your system, they have been able to acquire your clients' or your contacts' data. And that isn't somehow, it's your fault. And I mean, one example which really stuck in my mind was there is a criminal law firm called Tuckers in the UK. They got fined almost £100,000 by the Information Commissioner's Office in 2022 when criminals hacked into the system and put various confidential data on the dark web. And I must admit, when I was reading the story, I had a lot of sympathy with them. Because I was thinking, yes, you perhaps could have done things differently. You perhaps could have done things better. But you are a victim of this crime. You will suffer potential reputational damage already. So I wasn't sure who was winning through them being hit with a £100,000 fine. Is that the way, in your experience, the data regulator operates?
Yes, in my experience, it is. And I believe that we do need someone to play the bad cop in this particular scope or in this particular area. We really do, because it's important to set precedents and to set that high standard. And is it really about, okay, was £100,000, was that too much? Was it not enough? How did they actually come to that figure? Did they put anything in place that was high level? Did they use military grade security that could have helped remediate any type of risk? How did the hack come about? And there's all these different questions, and it's kind of like a strict liability offense, isn't it, really? You went through the red light when you knew that you shouldn't have, even though you might not have meant to go through the red light, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you do need to, as a society, need to have a set of standards in place. The EU which is obviously what the UK GDPR is based off,
yes,
takes privacy and civil liberties very seriously. And just as an individual, I take that very seriously.
Sure.
So to go back to your question, I do believe that it is something that the ICO...
They're quite tough on.
Yeah, that they are. And they need to be tough on.
Yeah.
Because what if you were at the other end of the stick? You know, you would hope that your law firm actually, or that your, you know, the law firm that you instruct has your data secure. Going back to something that you said before as well, I think what's happened is digital technologies have advanced so quickly. We've innovated so quickly, which is absolutely amazing. Though the knowledge and the understanding of how to protect the information, so, you know, what is hosted or accessed or stored either in the cloud or, you know, it's an on-premise system, I believe that particular knowledge of info security isn't as clear as the actual tech itself. So everyone understands the tech. I say everyone very loosely. People understand the tech to a high level. Obviously, people who are the developers and who are the experts, they understand it more in depth. Though people generally understand what, you know, how the tech works. A lot of people don't actually know what cybersecurity is and how to secure their own data as an individual, let alone big organizations. And I think it really just starts with personal understanding of cybersecurity and then moving towards, you know, the different types of companies, whether they be startups or scale-ups or whether they be large enterprises or even just sole traders. So it's really about understanding what infosecurity is, because it's, you know, infosecurity, cybersecurity, very similar, but, you know, infosecurity is just the overall, you know, security of your information. Of course, the name lends, you know, to what it is.
You've just made such a good point, Eugénie, in terms of how quickly tech is developing. And my concern on this is, from a law firm perspective, something like GDPR, something like these whopping big fines that we can get if we get this wrong, that still feels quite new. Yeah. Yet the technology that we're going to have to mitigate our clients, mitigate the risk of our clients' data being accessed, is emerging, is progressing at such a level that I'm just concerned that no sector, certainly not the legal sector, could move at that same rate. And it just seems to me that very strict regulation, and I agree with you, it is important that it's strict, combined with rapidly emerging technology, it's presenting a level of risk that I think we need to take a discussion about. Is this something you're viewing with clients that you work with, that they're having to bear in mind just how quickly tech is moving when thinking about how they protect themselves and their clients from risk and from these big fines? Absolutely.
It's not just even law firms and lawyers alone or in-house lawyers. It's most companies that face this problem. I mean, look at the letter that was signed by Elon Musk and a few others about slowing down. Let's just pause on, I mean, really, how could you really pause on creating, you know, the particular AI, you know, ChatGPT? How are we going to pause on that large language model? How can we do that? But that's not the question at hand. I'm just using that as an example.
It's a great point.
How can we actually pause that? Because then we stifle innovation. But naturally, the legal profession or the legal industry is a very slow-moving industry. When I was working in legal technology in Australia and even in the UK, lawyers were always really late adopters. Now, I believe that's because of the general complexity of the work that we have to do, because we have to, you know, the value of our work is really in the complexity and the critical thinking and the analysis that we have to provide to every single case. So we're not thinking about all the other areas. It's like, I'm no expert in being a software developer. I know certain things, but I'm no expert in writing code. And I don't want to be an expert in writing code. You know, my expertise is my expertise within the law. And of course, we have other areas as well, but we can be quite niche, right? So I think, how do you find the balance? And it's very difficult to find the balance between innovation, striking a balance between innovation and having the law kind of level up.
Keep up.
Yeah.
With innovation.
And then what's really underpinning the law is, you know, are the people. So it's actually about lawyers leading the way here as well. It's lawyers understanding the law and interpreting the law in a way that's actually going to help move the needle. As in, we still need to be innovative because of society and it's fun and we need to be creative. Though, how can we protect the rights and the privacy of, rights to privacy of individuals? How do we do that?
Well, this is such a great point. Let's just pick up on this letter that has been written by Elon Musk and others calling for a 6-month pause in the development, particularly of artificial intelligence. Where I am on this is that the risk is that unlike the early stages of the internet was developed by governments, by universities and by non-profits. That is not the case now. The development of AI and in due course the metaverse is being driven by big tech. So this is capitalism raw. There's money to be made. There's huge sums of money to be made quickly. We've seen that in terms of the growth of something like GPT. I think that 6-month pause is really sensible.
I agree.
And the reason for that is we have to find a level playing field where all the key players are brought around the table and we get some guardrails up. And I believe that if those guardrails are established and then applied in a consistent manner, there's no reason why big money cannot still be made, but the best interests of consumers and businesses and of society is still at the forefront. So I think they're right. I do think we need a pause. I just hope it happens.
Yeah, it's difficult because I did read it and I really thought to myself, are we going to be able to do this? Big tech has a very big hold over people. Look at the way people use social media. That's a perfect example. There are certain things that we can't live without now, which are technologically based. That's the foundation. So we then need to, say, because it's gotten out of hand to a degree, we then need to say, let's empower the individuals who know what they're doing, So I happened to fall into this, when I moved to London, I ended up, being introduced to a client who's now my longstanding client in America. They're a top cybersecurity company, Microsoft partner, and, they introduced me to the whole world of cybersecurity. And then working with other companies. And when you start to work with big companies, and I genuinely work with technology companies, you really start to see the nature of, their bread and butter is pretty much the data, the use of data. If you're talking about SaaS companies, it's the use of data, the transfer of data, the storage, the access. That really is the crux of what they do, or everything's around that. So then I kind of was thrown into the deep end of understanding the GDPR and understanding data processing agreements and, but hang on a second, we're transferring outside of the EU and the UK, what do you do? We need an adequacy, decision. Okay, what does that mean? So then you're going into these different realms. Now, then when you're negotiating with legal counsels or you're just negotiating with other lawyers who are data protection specialists as well, it's very interesting because their take might be very different. And their take sometimes is this is the law and this is what it is. But was the UK and the EU GDPR, were they created to stifle innovation?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? And this is the problem I have with, to some extent, with all regulation.
Yeah.
In terms of who is it who decides where those guardrails are that I referred to? Now, I think I'm more comfortable in the market deciding. And when I say the market, I mean, let's just go back to the example we said earlier. I think if you get all big tech round a table and they reach a consensus, and I know the cynics will be listening to this thinking, you're having a laugh, aren't you? The only consensus they're going to have is they want to make as much money as possible. I don't think that's true. There are safety teams in big tech. They do have commitments to ethics. Maybe they haven't taken them as seriously. Maybe they got things wrong, but we have to trust the market. And my concern is if GDPR and the other data protection regulations stays with effectively what I would think of as the government, the big state, Well, you do have people who are fundamentally against innovation and change, responsible for stifling that. And I just worry we've not got the balance right.
I don't think we do yet. I'm not sure when we're going to get the balance, because you've got people who are out there, yes, we need the balance. Others like, no. For instance, the German workers' councils or the Italian workers' councils, and they come in and they will block anything that any type of company within those particular jurisdictions, if they want to do anything to do with, measuring performance of an employee, for instance. So they'll come in and those particular workers' councils block that type of work, which could be largely beneficial for organizations.
Yeah.
Right? So those particular workers' councils are actually there to, to form and function like unions to protect the individuals. But then is it really bad if an organization wants to understand how their employees working? Is it, are they efficient?
Yeah.
I mean,
there's perfectly ethical reasons why they might want to access that.
Exactly. Why is that a bad thing? So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And I always say this when I'm negotiating contracts, like, it's really important to understand actually why these particular laws were enacted. It wasn't actually just to block the innovation,
No.
And we keep using this word innovation, but I mean, wasn't trying to block the use of data. There are definitely reasons why we need to process data and access data and store data for services. That's, we live in a capital world. That's how the world goes round.
Well, it does.
To provide services.
Indeed, and we
not just that though, by the way, not just providing services, but yeah.
Data drives a lot of our decisions, don't they? Data around, let's just use an example. We were talking about COVID earlier. Data was allegedly driving some of the decisions that were being made at national level, and we can argue about whether the interpretation of the data was right or the way it was collated was right. But the idea that we couldn't access that, for example, would have been farcical. But just talk us through, we've talked about what the potential risks are in terms of this regulation, in terms of holding up creativity. But just talk us through, obviously we're in the UK and there are differing rules throughout the world, but just talk us through some of the key principles for businesses in terms of protecting their cybersecurity, keeping their data well protected, and avoiding some of those risks. What are the key principles? The
key principles, not to be confused with the GDPR principles, but the key principles to securing cybersecurity. I think I probably go straight into something that is called zero trust, and it's a framework, right? So it's a framework. It's a military grade framework, set of principles. Okay, that I'm not sure who coined it, though it's very well pushed in the cybersecurity industry, very well pushed by Microsoft, for instance, and the large security players. Now, it's a framework that encompasses three main principles, and that's assume breach. Let me get this right: assume breach, verify explicitly, and then least privilege access. Okay, and basically you want. There are 6 defense areas, and that's identities, endpoints, applications, networks, infrastructure, and data. So that's actually the cybersecurity infrastructure. It's not just data. It's actually all of those points. And what you do is across these 6, defense areas, you apply those 3 principles that I've just said each and every time. So every single interaction, we'll call it that, is actually viewed as an external player, and it needs to be verified before it enters, okay? And there are different types of, obviously, verification. So it's pretty much about making it working productively, seamlessly, and making sure every single device, every single application, every single piece of these defense areas are all interlinked, right? And secured properly.
And could that be, you use the word device there, so is that literally sort of thinking of like hardware there, just making sure that your laptop, you're changing your passwords frequently, you've got proper backup, you've got, what do they call it now?
Encryption as well. You need encryption. The other thing as well, you mentioned passwords, and this is it's it's spoken about it again in the security world, but it's not spoken about enough. Passwords are really insecure.
Yeah.
Because people forget them, they write them down, they leave them on a piece of paper, they just change like one character when they have to change them again. You literally have to remember so many different things in your head that you can't possibly remember a password. So I'm more so pushing passwordless security.
Just give me an example of those two. Talk about biometrics first and then go back to the dual one.
So biometrics could be obviously Face ID.
Yeah.
Okay. Or fingerprints, okay? Or a YubiKey, for instance. And that's actually being able to log in to certain devices. But YubiKey is not obviously biometric. It's a different type of passwordless. But biometric, of course, is all to do with, the person. So.
And to what extent? Because, it does feel that that's got to have a big part in the solution, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, 80% of attacks are based off passwords.
Yeah. And, is that unbreachable in terms of, say, Face ID? Is there any way which a hacker could, I can't think, do you think, these days of deep fakes?
I was about to say deep fakes, yeah.
Could they create an image of me which could effectively pass Face ID so they could access my phone? Is that a risk?
I genuinely believe that they could as well. Yeah. So look at what happened with the Pope.
Of course, he had a puffer jacket on or something, didn't he?
Puffer jacket. I actually saw that and I thought, that actually looks so good.
Oh, it did?
And then I didn't realise it was just a deep fake. But it looks great.
It looks very realistic.
Yeah. So again, passwordless, yes, I know exactly what you're saying. So maybe not biometric then. For instance, if we're going down the advent of that, then a YubiKey would be much better.
What's a YubiKey?
YubiKey is it's actually a product. So I think it's YUBI and then key. And it's essentially like a little key that you can put on your key ring.
Couldn't someone just steal it though?
No, but I believe it's locked in some way or shit. Yeah.
Right, so, I see. So it's. I suppose they couldn't just steal it. They would also have to get access to whatever the devices were.
Yeah, yeah.
But it seems to me that because now, that phrase you use, zero trust. That is how it feels. That you
shouldn't trust anyone.
No,
you can't. And that's something that I really largely say to my clients is that you need to make sure that you have a very secure infrastructure. That's the first thing. So then you've got organizations, right? So no matter how big your organization is. So some organizations have IT teams.
Yes.
They have infosecurity teams. Sometimes the IT team is the infosecurity team. I'm talking about now securing the infrastructure. I'm not trying to talk about like negotiating contracts and data protection and this and that. So if you're a large organization and you have a security team, a dedicated security team or a dedicated information technology team or information team, then you need to make sure that is the first thing that you do is secure all of these defense areas like I was talking about.
Sure.
Yeah, that's the first thing. If you're a small, medium enterprise or you're like a sole trader, then you need to think about how you're storing the information on your laptop. Are you going to put it on a hard drive? Is the information encrypted? How are you getting the information from your clients?
Because if you just wing it across on an email, that's not the best, is it?
It's not. It's really not. Are these emails encrypted? Yes, you're using passwords. Are you changing them?
Here's my account number.
Yeah. I don't actually,
Probably not the best idea, is it?
Could you, I don't actually save, when you put not your phone details, you put your card details in. When you're buying something online and it can save on your profile, I never save it.
God, when you think about it.
Or Apple Pay, I don't use that. No. Most of my friends, if not all of my friends use it, I do not use Apple Pay. I do not have that kind of information on my phone.
Podcast today is brought to you by Zeus Tech Solutions, who provide dev on demand for law firms. When I was managing partner of a law firm, recruiting and retaining top tech talent was one of the biggest challenges. And worse still, because we didn't have the knowledge in the business to manage and coach a technical team, it was a constant cycle of frustration, downtime, lost revenue, and proclaim lying dormant. Well, for the past 5 years, Zeus have looked after both of Spirent Group's law firms in the UK and Australia, and it's been a game changer. Now we get all of our tech on tap From IT director to .NET developer, we get that whenever we want. Zeus provide the best use of tech to all of our fee earners with no recruitment fees and absolutely no nonsense. So if you're a law firm who are frustrated with their tech anywhere in the world, go to www.zeustechsolutions.co.uk and hit the live chat option, and the answer to all of your tech solutions, however specific they are, is right there. Better still, if you mention that you heard about Zeus on the podcast, you will get a free health check for your case management system. So that's Zeus Tech Solutions, dev on demand for law firms. And now on with the podcast.
You know, this issue of zero trust, because let me give you an example that when I talk to law firms who've got themselves in real trouble around things like a breach of the cybersecurity, one example comes up quite a lot. And that's when it's typically with property lawyers, where they're coming to the back end of a transaction. And let's say they're acting for the seller and they're completing with their opponent. Everything's going really well. They've got their client's bank details. They know where they're sending the money. They've got their ID. All of that's been done. And then they get an email. They get an email saying, oh, can you send it to a different account? I've just opened it. Something's happened with this account. Can you send it to this different account? And I had one conversation very recently with a lawyer. You're talking about a relatively junior lawyer who'd received that email, thought, okay, fair enough. It's from the client's email address. Hundreds of thousands of pounds come in. It goes out to the new account. That's been withdrawn and shut down within minutes. And it's through a hack. It's through a security breach. This is a criminal who's managed to access the system. They've then got off with that money, and the law firm is left with a very unhappy client and a very big risk. First of all, how is it that hackers are able to do that? How do they know there's a property transaction? And what can law firms in particular and other businesses do to protect themselves in that situation?
So I'm not privy to how a hacker would know that, though I do know there are very advanced hackers out there, obviously. Absolutely. Where they've come from, where their background is. You never really understand it, right? Though there's so many ways that they might have already had something, installed on the systems.
Yes. So
right?
Tracking what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like some type of malware installed.
Right. Got you.
And then something similar to that, and they'd been tracking it for a while just to make sure the types of, pieces of communication that were going back and forth. And then that's, then they'll send a phishing email.
And they'll spot a situation which they can exploit.
Exactly.
Right.
And that goes on into social engineering. So there's three different types of risks that three different types of breaches there. So that's, social engineering, that's malware, and then that's also a phishing attack. Okay. So there's, sometimes it's not just one, sometimes it's a host of different types of attacks because they need to kind of get to the end result. The other thing that I didn't touch upon is I touched upon it a little bit earlier in terms of data protection and lawyers needing to educate themselves, but you need to also have the education, really up to par.
In your team?
In your team.
Wow.
You need to update and educate your specific team, your employees, from your junior lawyers, your paralegals, your senior associates, your partners, everyone, your law clerks.
It's interesting. Sorry to cut you off.
That's okay.
It's interesting because what you've just said there really links in with this idea of zero trust, doesn't it? Because I'm just putting myself in the shoes of that junior fee earner who gets the emails thinking you send it to a different account. What that suggests to me is that perhaps the law firm there hadn't got the education piece right. Because if I'd got that email and I'd been trained, and particularly with the gravity that was due, I'd be thinking, hang on, the client's changing their instructions here. This is very important. This is a large financial sum. I'm reporting this and we're going to investigate it before we change anything.
But is the junior lawyer actually making the payments with the finance team not? I mean, it dare say it depends how big the law firm is, really.
They were. I think it was just a case of, it was like the back end of a transaction. Everything had been agreed. Right. It was literally just almost like the administration.
Right. Okay.
And it sounded to me that the responsibility was with the accounts team and with the fee earner.
Yeah,
So
wow.
lots wrong there, I would have thought.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's also, again, who has access to the information. That's another thing. So it's about securing those defense areas, though it's also, there's a 7-step process. So it's not just about implementing.
You've got this on your website, haven't you, the 7-step process?
I believe it's on there.
Or a blog. I think I'm sure I've read this before.
I've written a few blogs around the 7-step process.
Yeah.
But the 7-step process is essentially, you first do an asset inventory and understand, the vulnerability of your systems, right, across those areas. Then you go straight into the identity and access, okay, as in who's accessing what types of information, what teams do we have, what individuals, what vendors, what clients. There are all different types of stakeholders in a business, okay? And you want to understand what is your identity and access management, meaning, you using passwordless security?
Yeah.
Are you using passwords? If not, what's your minimum standard of a password? Is it X amount of letters, numbers, special characters? How often do they need to be changed? The next part is intelligent endpoint protection. So, of course, protecting all of your endpoints. So endpoints meaning from A to B, essentially.
Is that more your processes then, is it, in terms of who it is who operates those?
As in the process of movement of data.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's transferring the data.
Yeah, I've got
so
you.
it
Right.
might not just be it could just be like, on the system. It might not
Yes.
just be it could be just one person transferring it into one,
I'm with
across one device or whatnot. Then it's, again, logical and physical segmentation. That's really important. So segmenting the data from sensitive and non-sensitive, for instance. Okay, that's really important. HIPAA requires that, which is the federal healthcare law in America.
Oh, okay.
So you have to segment the data. I mean, the GDPR, makes you do that as well. But you need to have logical and segmented separation of the data.
I'm with you.
And of course, it's logical to do that. You would want to make sure that you are doing that, because then you're able to, keep up with the principles of, data retention. What types of data are you retaining? Sometimes you don't need to retain the data for that long. You should only retain it for 30 days, for instance. What data are you deleting? What data are you anonymizing? Or, what data are you returning? That's why you need to segment the data. Also, you don't want your, one client's data with client A with client B. You want to make sure that they're separated as well. Okay. That's another thing. Then it gets into the continuous monitoring. So you want to continually monitor. You want to do pen tests, for instance. Do you want to do an external audit once a year or every six months? Do you want to, let's say, for instance, go and get your SOC 2 compliance, which adds to your credibility, saying that you have a high level of security, for instance. The next thing is data governance. Okay, data governance kind of comes into
it's your infrastructure, it's your plan, it's your team,
Exactly.
It's how you deal with situations when they arise.
Exactly, and it's also what data do you have and why do you have it? Again, purpose. What's the purpose of processing the data? And the data limitation, data minimization. You want to make sure that you don't have too much data, because you want to make sure that you're in alignment with GDPR principles.
Indeed.
As well as the DPA that you would have signed if you're processing information with your clients. And then the last point is the employee awareness piece, awareness and adoption.
Right, got you.
So
are they doing what they're supposed to? Yeah.
Rolling
Makes
out
sense.
an internal and a good substantial internal training piece that covers info security, confidentiality. I even put in, intellectual property, which is so important for technology and SaaS companies, and also data protection, of course. So you really want to keep instilling, those particular principles across your organization. Those are, really important points.
And I mean, that's so helpful that you've given that that's 7 steps. And we're going to include links to your blog on this in the podcast description. Is what you've just done there a helpful illustration of the help you can give businesses? So this is what you do when you're working with a client.
Yes, definitely. So it's building that particular digital infrastructure, meaning that you're building up the infrastructure to be secure. Okay, so it's building that security from the ground up. Some organizations don't need the high level. You might just start small. Some organizations go, no, we need everything. And I would implore all law firms to go hard and to spend a bit of money on securing these infrastructures.
Well, if they don't, they might end up spending a lot of money if they get fined.
Yeah, exactly.
So prevention's better than cure.
Of course. And it's not even just the fines. Like £100,000, okay, it's a lot, but is it really that much? But it's more about the reputation.
Absolutely. Could cost you more than that.
Yeah, the reputation. And you have to build that up again. And so that £100,000 is nothing in comparison to a loss of reputation, because
it's the tip of the iceberg,
you could be billing millions a year.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
That's exactly right. And the other thing is, if you don't know, you need to get an expert, and you need to spend money on getting an expert in these particular areas, because you could get it wrong.
And is this something that if people are listening and they're thinking, do you know what? My company just has not got this right. You've talked us through the 7 steps, and I'm not sure we've got one of those steps. Do they just reach out to you?
Yeah, of course.
You can help them?
Definitely. Definitely. Would love to have a chat. I think the first step would be, if you reach out, you'd have a security briefing, which is it's a quick discussion briefing to really understand what's going on. And then we can identify for you what's actually going on, within your organization, where we feel like you need to begin, and how, we can give you a plan, how quickly we can actually implement it for you, or what you need to do to help remediate that. And it's just the education piece is really important, in my opinion. And the other aspect is not just the cybersecurity piece, it's also the transferring of, that comes under that, but it's also the data protection piece, which we didn't speak about. Are you transferring across borders sufficiently?
So you could be pursuing to different rules there.
Yeah. So I always say this when I'm negotiating with clients, because no other data protection law thus far comes close to the amount of protections GDPR citizens, EU and UK citizens have, or data subjects have, right? CCPA, the Californian Act, doesn't come, I can't say it comes close. Illinois is coming up with
right.
There's, Nevada has one, or coming up, I'm pretty sure.
So you can help clients not only with the sort of basics, but you can look at them in a bespoke way and say, well, if you're transferring data between these two countries, this might be something you have to put in place, particularly to protect yourselves on both sides of the transaction.
Absolutely. And that's, a lot of companies are doing more so now, having, data processing agreements in place, where it sets the standard of the technical and organizational measures, and the way that a company, is processing information, and obviously if there are SCCs in place, of course. So I believe, yes, definitely that's something that I can definitely help with, though I believe that it's multifaceted. The area is so multifaceted. And the other thing that you should always ask your clients as well, because a lot of your clients are law firms.
Yeah, absolutely.
That I ask my clients is, in the terms of engagement, or the terms of business, I should say, when you're giving that to your clients, is there a section about data protection?
Because there really needs to be, doesn't there?
Yeah, I dare say they would be, but the law firms are, data controllers as well, because they're also, what we were speaking of before, they're also getting, building up their own sales and development teams.
So they're acquiring data for different purposes.
Exactly. So obviously you're not going to have a data processing agreement for, you're just going to market to a client. So you want to make sure that all of those areas are actually tightened up as well. So that's also another element as well.
I mean, I think what we've established there is, in terms of the now, we're here in 2023, and this is already an area of great importance and some complexity for businesses. But it is reassuring to hear you say that there are logical steps that can be worked through. There are ways in which businesses can protect themselves now. But what let's just think about the future, because we've touched upon the development of artificial intelligence. I'm slightly obsessed with the metaverse at the moment. I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to present some real opportunities, but risks also. It seems to me that what underpins a lot of the risks, particularly in the future, around how we protect our data, is that identity has become so unclear. I don't feel that the social media companies and big tech got this right at the outset. I think it's an unintended consequence of the speed that they moved. We're in a situation where, as it stands now, somebody, a criminal, can in a very authentic looking way, can clone people's social media accounts, can produce imagery of them, can access personal details, can intervene in business transactions and, of course, personal transactions like banking. Now, as we move towards artificial intelligence, where it's possible people might have dual identities. It's, in the metaverse, we may have a virtual identity, which will be an avatar. And then obviously we have our physical identity in the physical world. What I'm saying there is identity is, if anything, becoming more diverse and more wide-ranging. How do you see, what needs to happen, do you think, to mean that we get this right now to prevent the issue of data crime, cybersecurity breaches getting worse in the future?
That's a fully loaded question.
Yeah, if you got the answer to it, we can get you in with Mark Zuckerberg and all that lot.
I would love to meet Elon and Mark.
Yeah.
My goodness, I have a few things to say. Probably days worth of things to say. However, I don't think we have it right just yet, because AI is still developing like wildfire. Blockchain technology is still being developed. I mean, blockchain technology is quite old, actually. But it was just we just got the rush in the last 3 years purely because of, I believe, the pandemic, and everyone was kind of, researching it a lot then. Yeah. So I believe that those two types of technologies are still in their infancy. Though when we spoke a few weeks ago, we were talking about the advent of fake and real.
Yes.
And I think that that's what we're dealing with in society.
We are.
Fake and real. And it's not even just like technology and authentication, for instance, or when you're trying to, online, your online personality, and you've got this other persona offline, you look two different people, like as two different people. For instance, like you said, you've got this avatar, or you're identified by a string of keys because of your blockchain wallet, for instance.
I suppose just things like filters as well.
I was just about to say, you've got all these filters, and on social media, and that's really crazy. That's like kind of gone again. It's spread like wildfire. So how do you, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure how we can, it would be that we would slow it down.
Yes.
So I think with that said, it kind of comes into another area that I look into, which I didn't touch on, and that's privacy by design. And that's getting in before the tech's actually developed. That's getting in, you've got your legal teams or your data protection teams or your privacy teams, sitting with your info security teams and sitting with your product engineers, your UX, your UI designers, and your actual engineers, your software developers, and you're all in a room, and the developers say, hey, what do you think? How can we do this? And all together, people apply their critical thinking caps, and they say, right, this is what we believe. So again, it's privacy by design. So the whole, again, I say privacy by design because privacy is really all about access to the data and who's who, essentially. But that's just the term that we call it. But it's really just about developing the product in alignment with thinking about these fundamental principles of who is who.
Yes. Of
cybersecurity principles, because they're all we've spoken about so many different principles, not just data protection principles, but cybersecurity principles. Okay, so it's really about looking at all of both areas and saying, okay, how do we develop a product that actually can encompass these principles but still be innovative? And you can do it. I've worked with so many clients who do it. So you were going to say something?
All I was going to say is, let's use the Pope in his puffer jacket example. Looked so convincing, but using our common sense, we could work out that it probably wasn't real.
Yeah.
However, there could be instances where a deep fake is thrown up which says, for example, that one country has invaded another, or which says that one country is turning law against a certain type of people within the country that could be much more persuasive. People could think that's happening. It's real. There's a war on. And it strikes me that the artificial intelligence is that good that we're in a situation where we might need a way in which, some form of verification of all content that we experience and all data that we receive, which we just know is genuine. Like
what Elon's done with Twitter, with the
that's an interesting one. I would say that's a great example of it. I wonder if it goes far enough.
I don't think it doesn't go far enough.
You think to yourself, don't you? If the only gateway is paying, what is it? £7 a month? Is it?
I think it's $8, so it's like
$8, £7 a month.
Yeah.
So you think to yourself, if that's the only barrier to entry, well, with the limitless access that bad actors have throughout the world, they're going to pay £7 a month, aren't they, for fake profiles that they get the blue tick on? And imagine that, if anything, could get them access to doing even worse things if everyone takes that as a verification of them being real.
You touched upon another point there about information being spread in the media, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm largely a proponent of using your critical thinking to really understand, actually, did it really happen or didn't happen? I'm not going to go into other areas that I believe were, made up for certain parts of particular companies or industries, for instance, to appease the needs and the pockets of certain individuals and companies. It's not the platform for that. But I will touch on the fact that the best way to control society is to put out, certain pieces of information, and then people start to it spreads. And then people start to believe in something that may not necessarily be real. Now, going towards the law and looking at deep fakes, it's illegal to impersonate someone already. Every country has laws in place that don't allow you to use someone else's works that's been, for instance, copyrighted.
That's true.
You can't steal something like that, or their works, as I was saying. You can't impersonate someone when you're not them. That's every single country has a law of that kind. Some more advanced than others. Some that there's harsher penalties than others.
Yeah.
Every country has that in the world. Yeah. So it's a matter of how do we tighten that up?
Detection and enforcement, isn't it?
Yeah. And like you said, is the blue tick enough? And, the payment for the verification badge, is that enough? I think that there are so many different ways, but you really bring up something. I don't think we have the answer yet. I really don't.
Do you know what? I was thinking about, could we have like the equivalent of a digital watermark? When you get like a £20 note or a £50 note and you got your watermark in the note, and that is very difficult or maybe impossible to fake. I was thinking you could have something like that, but if that isn't an answer, I think what Elon Musk is looking at in terms of a neurological aspect to do identity verification, I can't think of a better one than that. And that brings to play a whole range of ethical and physical considerations. But I think what we're agreed on, I think what most people would agree on, is that in a situation where law firms are being faced not only with the risks prevented by misuse and breaches of data and the legislation now, that really we've got to come together as perhaps as a society, but particularly in terms of big tech, to crack this issue of identity once and for all, because if we don't, the risks are going to get worse.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's going back to the lawyer who sent the money.
Yeah.
It's an education thing as well. It's a cultural shift. Why do people want to be fake? Why do people want to get online and bully other people? Why do you want two different personas? For me, that would be so exhausting. Yes. I couldn't think of anything worse than being two different people.
Oh, no,
imagine trying to hold up some identity online and then hold up some identity in person. And there have been people to be found that they've had 3 identities online or one person, or they're dressing differently. And so what to hide their identity, that is, not for other reasons. So again, it's also a cultural shift.
It is.
It comes up with, where does it stem from? Probably trauma.
Well, that's the thing. What's the drivers in the quest to be unauthentic? And I think it seems to me that it's the drive for money, it's the drive for beauty, it's the drive for
status.
Status, absolutely. And you're right to say that tech might provide some of the solutions to those, but it's not the only solutions. It's about what we stand for as a people, I think.
Are you in your integrity as well? I always start with this point, you're in business to do what? So, going back to the whole overarching reason why we're here is, on this podcast is, we're doing business essentially, and you need to protect the data, for instance. But you need to understand, before you even get into anything, is what are your values and your principles?
What's your purpose?
Exactly. Yeah. And then it goes into individual purpose, So it's like, okay, if you have that, if you know who you are, if you are being authentic, then do you really feel that you will go and bully someone else or call someone else out online in a negative way? There are so many ways to do certain things. So I think that it's education, it's changing of culture, it's privacy by design might be the wrong word, but what I mean is, designing the actual technology to have the principles, data protection, info security, cybersecurity, for instance, interlaced with the way that it's the tech is designed. And then it's looking at, how can we verify? Is taking a photo and uploading the photo of your ID, which might be fake, and taking a photo of, like this, is this real? So is that type of verification? So it's going into all of those areas. I think that we are on the cusp of change, though, as a society. I think society is really going back to its roots, though.
Well, that's a very positive note for us to end on, and I do agree with you in terms of to take it back to the legal sector. Change should be viewed positively. We found solutions to problems in the past. We'll find them again in the future. And it's been wonderful to talk to you, Eugénie, just because to get that practical, very clear help in terms of the steps that we need to take in order to do that, and also to know that you're here to support us in these future endeavors as they develop. So all of your details, your contact details, your website, your blogs are all included in the description to the podcast, wherever you're watching or you're listening. It's been such a pleasure to have your company. Thanks for sharing your expertise. Thanks for coming to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved it.
My pleasure. All the best.
Thank you so much.